Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our session presenting the top-line results of our DC study, Beyond the Defaults. My name is Stephen Messenger. I'm going to be the host for the webinar today. And I'm also the head of UK Strategic Institutions here at Invesco. This study has been the result of a strategic partnership that we have formed with Nest Insights that combines their deep UK knowledge on the challenge in DC and has paired that up with our own internal language consultancy team, Invesco Consulting, who are experts in uncovering the emotional response savers have to the language used in financial services. We reflected on the huge success that auto-enrollment has been in this country since 2012 to mobilize an entire generation of savers to start on that retirement journey, but then to really consider the what next. And the study really looked to try and unpack in more detail the mindset of this defaulted generation. Just being in a scheme in of itself is not going to be enough to give members the right retirement outcomes. So we looked to identify or answer two specific questions. How do people, the defaulted generation, actually understand pension contributions currently, and what is their awareness of this and their barriers to action? And secondly, how can language around contributions be better framed so the members are saving moments? Now, the session is going to be split into two sections. Number one, there'll be a headline presentation from my colleagues at Invesco Consulting over in the States. That's Gary DeMoss and Scott West, who are directors of this unit and have been doing this kind of research for well over 10 years. And then the second part, we'll be entering into a panel discussion and a Q&A. I'm thrilled to be joined by Sally Bridgeland, actuary, non-executive director. Sally's sat on numerous prominent DC schemes and will give us that DC practitioner viewpoint. And also thrilled to be joined by Matthew Blackstead, who is the director of analysis at Nest, clearly very, very closely involved with this piece of work. That's it from me. All I'd say is please do submit your questions. I think there's a box below my head, so feel free to do that. There's also another panel with the research which you can download and familiarize yourself with. But apart from that, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues from Invesco Consulting to run through the results. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning here from the windy city of Chicago. Really excited to be with you. This will be, admittedly, a bit of a drink from a fire hose. We're going to condense a lot of material from a study that we've been exhaustively done over the last 6 months into just 30 minutes. And if it is something that you'll have action to take later in the presentation if you're interested to gain more information into these insights. So, as Steve said, 2012 was a watershed moment and a tremendous opportunity to engage a group of people that heretofore had not been engaged. But as Steve said, that really had an unintended consequence of getting people involved, but then disengaging and not fully taking on the urgency and not delaying any action. And that's really the critical thing I think we want to talk about today is how to help auto enrollees further engage now, not push it to some time in the future. And that reminds me of a quick joke about a guy that goes to an interview, and at the end of the interview, the boss says, you know, we're going to hire you, but you're going to start at the minimum salary. And later on, it will increase. And the guy says, okay, then maybe I'll come back later on. And I think that's the dilemma we have here, is trying to engage people now. So as we mentioned before, this program is called Reaching Out, and we've noticed some good news throughout the research, and I want to start by showing you that. Obviously, as been mentioned before, we have seen 10 million new saving people putting at least 8% of their savings. 91% of people have a somewhat or favorable, very favorable opinion of their schemes. And 78%, almost 80% believe that this is something their employers are giving them, not something that's obligated to them. So that's really the good news. But the unintended consequence of auto enrollment we see on this next slide with 3 more percentages that are not quite as positive. Just a little more than half don't think or don't know the government provides any kind of tax relief for their contributions. 68% said they followed the default contribution when they joined their workplace pension. And close to 80%, this is staggering, said that they were never told to rethink how much they contributed to their pension. So what we have here, quite frankly, and we all know this on this call, is we have sort of the unintended consequence of what we're calling Generation D, generation default. Now, we are word specialists, as Steve mentioned. We don't want to overstate the importance of language as the sole catalyst for engaging people, but I think it's true to say that it plays a role in engaging people. And if you don't have an attention to language, it can certainly be an increased barrier to engaging. So really the challenge today is to think about what if. What if language, in its particular role, was able to move this Gen D, generation default, to deeper engagement with new enrollees in their schemes? What if it resulted in better, more informed decisions, more satisfaction? And ultimately, the goal of all of these endeavors is to help people achieve better retirements. As I mentioned, this has been a great relationship that we've had with Nest over a long period of time, but particularly an intense period of time over these 6 months. Here's the source of this information. First and foremost, as Steve mentions, I co-lead a group called Invesco Global Consulting. We're based here in Chicago. We have operations in 6 different countries. And we have organically the largest study ever done on language in this industry, of which you're going to see the most recent chapter. Our partner in this has been Nest Insight, obviously incredibly capable and competent and thought leaders in this space. And there's a lot of resources you can gain from them. And then lastly, our partner, Michael Maslansky, housed in New York. They've been with us for now 17 years. They are word specialists. They use a very unique technology that I want Gary, my colleague, to explain right now. So Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So basically, there's really a 3-step process that we use in partnering with Maslansky. The first step in the whole process of our research really is what we call in-depth interviews. And this is where we go to industry experts in the pension industry. So for instance, here we're talking to scheme trustees, pension providers, advisors, consultants, to find out what's working and identify what are the key topics we really want to discuss. The second stage of our research is what we call dial sessions. And these are really interesting. So you can see here on this screen here, you imagine a focus group of about 30 people. They've got a dial, and then that dial is set to 50. And if they like what they're hearing, they're dialing up towards 100. If they don't, they're dialing down towards 0 and back and forth. And instantaneously, we are hearing and seeing their responses on this screen, as you can see in front of you here. Their collective responses. 50 is at neutral. Anything above 50, anything above 60 is a total buy-in, and anything below that means they're not feeling good about their messaging. So this has been really interesting in the way that we've done this. Just fascinating to see the results that we get in these type of sessions here. So that is step 2, is the dial sessions that we do, in-depth interviews, dial sessions, and then finally, we do a national survey to make sure that we validate the findings of what we have here. That's the main key thing that we do here. In this specific case, the survey consisted of about 50-50, male versus female, average age 22 to 54, salary anywhere between 18,000 to 45,000 pounds. But we just want to make sure that we validate the findings that we see in the dial sessions. So that's the methodology. It's really an extensive process. And every time that we do this, there is something that we certainly learn, all the time. And that is very simply that words matter, And words matter, and it's not what you say, but what really matters is what are they hearing. And I do want to mention that we were able to do this not only, as you can see from the original illustration there, in person, but we're also able to do these virtually as well. So we basically simply do smaller groups, but do the same number of people. Our participants simply move their participant slider back and forth, and it just equates to what we see on the dial session. So the bottom line is what we used to do in person, we can now do virtually as well. So words do matter. We know that. We know that it makes a big difference. And so one of the things we want to do here to kind of keep everybody engaged here is we're going to ask you some questions. And so I'm going to show you a slide, as you can see on here. Which word or phrase did 1,500 scheme members prefer? And what I want you to do very simply is look at those 3 questions and write down, what do you think that they chose? So is it investing for? Is it A or B? Write down, oh, I think it's comfortable retirement. Write this down on a pad of paper here because we're going to test your knowledge here to see how you do. Then go to achieving. Achieving, is it financial independence or is it financial security? Write that phrase down, either financial independence or financial security. Do the same thing for the third question right there. Are they your partners or is it to support you? So let's write those down, and we'll see how we do here as we kind of move through. And I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes here, the four, universal principles of what we found to be very, very effective. So 4 principles, what we're going to talk about. And this is what's really important to think about as we talk about the specific data points. What really matters are the 4 universal roll-up principles. So let's go to our first principle. What is that? Positive. People are looking for positive and hopeful messages. And think of this as a filter as you kind of go through your communication schemes. Am I giving a hopeful message or is it fear-based? Is it a negative message to the end user here? And you're going to be surprised, I think, at some of the results here. So let's get started, and we're going to look at one of our first videos here, and we're going to play a video, and we want to remind everybody that 50 is neutral. Anything above 50 is people are feeling good about your message. Anything below 50, they're not. And so I want to see if you can pick up what we did here. Why did they actually get the response that we've got? So let's roll a video and take a look at this.
When you started working as our employee, it was our responsibility to enroll you in the pension and ensure you started saving. But prioritizing your pension is up to you. The good news is that it can be simple to find extra savings if you review your budget. One way to save a few extra pounds is to make your morning coffee at home and pay the £2 you save per day into your pension. Or to wait on the gym membership, new clothes, or haircut until next month. If you've already boosted your contributions past the minimum and feel confident you're on track, you may opt to keep more money in your pay packet. No matter the specifics, it's your personal responsibility to determine the best amount, set it up, and stick with it.
All right, well, let's take a look and see exactly where the dials ended up there. We're going to show you the script here very quickly, and we did not get a very good dial there. You can see that we started off okay. All right, there's good news there. But then what we did here is we talked about what we call the theme of sacrifice. We're going to ask you to make a sacrifice here. That does not really play well with our audience. Let's look at our next slide here, because we actually, not only did we see this in the videos, but we also saw this in the surveys that we did as well. So we asked the question, would you be willing to sacrifice a few things to save more? So let's look at kind of the responses that we've got here. First of all, sacrifice premium coffee to put more into your scheme. Secondly here, sacrifice going out to lunch to put more into your scheme. So it's coffee, lunch, and then the third one that we asked very simply was the sacrifice going to the local pub to put more into your scheme. Let's look at the results right here. Only 29% of people said, I'd be willing to sacrifice my coffee to put more into my scheme. When it comes to losing my lunch, it's only 30% would be willing to do that. But when we get to the whole idea of, sacrifice going to the local pub, definitely you can see the results here that only 16% of the people said they'd be willing to do that. Said another way, 84% said, no way. Am I gonna choose a pension over my pint? And we know a lot of people thought this was actually because we're going from a more solitary environment to a more social. We happen to think it's just purely the alcohol. You can make your own decision from that perspective. But the theme of sacrifice is something that does not really play well in trying to motivate people to get engaged. So let's look at a data point here. Let's look at one of our data points. And we can see here, which notice from your pension provider would you be more likely to read? And you can see 36%. If you do not take action, you could be at risk of losing your money. 64%, if you take action, you could be on track for a more comfortable retirement. And what is this all about? Well, first of all, this is kind of a fear-based approach. If you do not do this, look what's going to happen. You could run out of money. But what's really positive is the benefits of a comfortable retirement. So here's the second theme that we see. Not only do we see themes of sacrifice doesn't work, But the theme of fear-based does not work. And here's the third thing. Which notice from your pension provider would you be more likely to read? It is your duty and responsibility to manage your pension pot, 16%. No, it's that you can save more, earn more, and retire better by managing your personal pot. What doesn't work is putting the burden of obligation on them. That is something that does not work. What does work is talking about the benefits to them. It makes a big, big difference. So not only we tested a few data points, we also kind of looked at it from another perspective. We asked this question: which message would be most likely cause her to rethink her contribution rate? And this is a slider from left to right, as you can see right here. Let's look at the different responses here. So the first one, it's your responsibility to be sure you're saving the right amount into your pension. Well, there we go again. You know, you're putting the burden of obligation on me. That's not testing so well. Second choice that tested a little bit better. Do you know that you can change how much you can contribute to your pension? A little bit better, but let's see what really does test well here. And then, as pounds in your pension have advantages that pounds in a savings account don't, like tax relief and an employer match and potential to grow. What are those? All benefits, all benefits. So really quickly, as I summarize this, you know, we have to think about it. In developing a positive and hopeful language, what doesn't work are the themes of sacrifice, a fear-based approach, or putting that burden of obligation, you know, on our scheme members. What does work are powerful benefits. So there's our first point, positive and hopeful. Scott, why don't you take it from here? Let's talk about our second universal principle.
So be positive, number one. Number two, be plausible. So have credibility when you're making presentations and communications with scheme members. You know, we've been testing these next slides for several years in the U.S. and now for the last year and a half in the U.K. And here's one of a quick data point for you. So which is a more motivating reason to revisit how much you contribute in your workplace pension? And here we see the fact that the dream retirement is not toxic, but is far outweighed by a comfort retirement. That's a more plausible message in terms of an end goal. A similar theme comes from this question, which is a more motivating reason to revisit again how much you contribute? Is it because I want financial security or financial independence? What's really interesting here in talking with our colleagues at the research firm, Michael Maslansky, is that there has been steadily an increasing choice towards financial security over financial independence. Thinking again about this plausibility principle, it's just simply more plausible. Now, the last data point we'll talk about under plausibility is this question: which would you rather hear that your pension, your employer, and the government, are they your teammates, your partners, or they're there to support you? We found this really interesting. Here in the U.S., there's a fixation about having teams and people joining partnerships. And in the U.K., it was very clear that that was not what was most appealing. They want simply, if what you're telling me is they're there to help, then just say it that way. They're there to support us. So that's plausibility. Being positive, being plausible. The next principle is about being plain spoken. So what we'd like you to do here is, again, go back to your pad of paper, grab that pen. We're going to give you 3 clusters of phrases again, and I'd like you to react by writing down whether you believe that a scheme member would be more interested in accumulation or building their retirement pot. So write down your choice from that phrase. Secondly, would they be more interested in a glide path or a retirement path? And then thirdly, would they want to create a savings plan in line with your peers or a personal savings plan? So let's unpack this with our third principle, and that is one of the most powerful of the 4, being plain spoken, using plain English where possible. It's difficult to avoid jargon, but where possible, be as literal as you can. And really, you see this in this first data point. I'd be more interested in hearing about my accumulation or building my retirement pot. And again, there's a lot of traction, particularly among scheme members who understand what this term pot and retirement pot means. It's not that they don't understand what the word accumulation means, but there in the furtherance of plain spokenness, you see that. This next data point is interesting as well. So I'd be more interested in hearing about a glide path or a retirement path. This one we've been testing in the US for several years. There's an overuse of this glide path. And the reality is, as we listen to investors and now scheme members react to that, they think of a glide path as, yes, it's quiet, yes, it's smooth, but if it's a plane that's in a glide path, ultimately, unfortunately, it's going down. And so again, we're talking about the retirement, use the words retirement. The next data point here is under when you are more likely to revisit your pension. The next time I would do that would it be from my employer as getting a pay raise or celebrating the new year? And you see the split here is significant. And the second one is what you want to hear from your scheme provider. Is this when I receive my annual pension statement or moving a house, moving from house to house? I think what's significant here is what triggers people to want to revisit their level of contribution. It's really got to be financial. That life events aren't as catalytic in helping people revisit. Now, as we move to this next slide, I want to talk here about really two things. How do we communicate for our scheme members about what they put into this pot, and then secondly, what they take out of the pot? So let's go to our next data point. What's the best name for money that goes into your workplace pension from your pay packet? Is it investments, retirement salary, contributions, or savings? And here we see, for the very first time, a couple of things. I think what's interesting about this slide is not necessarily what wins, but what loses. In this powerful word, contributions. Now, contributions also has sort of maybe a less than positive connotation to it. I'm contributing, it's money I'll never see again. But by and large, the word contributions is empowering and engaging. And what's really interesting is to see how low the term savings. Now, again, we're not suggesting savings is toxic, but what we found loud and clear is that when you're using savings, that use it almost as a verb. I know that's grammatically incorrect, but use it as a verb and not a noun. So moving on to our next slide here, here's the question. Imagine you decide to put more money into your workplace pension. How would you describe the action? Am I topping up, increasing, boosting, upgrading, or other, whatever other might be? And the winner here is increasing. And I think that's, again, a significant bolster to this whole idea of being plain spoken. So what do they want to put in their pot? How do we talk about this under the issue of plain spoken? And we're using this T-shirt and this somewhat cryptic phrase to say, I'm just 30-something. Let me pay that off for you in the next slide. So when making contributions, which savings goal are you most likely to set for yourself? And we're talking here about frequency of contributions. And because most scheme members are paid on a monthly basis, that should be the time that they begin thinking naturally about making contributions. Not yearly, not daily, monthly seems to be the winner. So we've talked about how we put money in. Let's talk about how we take money out and how we refer to that in terms of language. And again, with another cryptic phrase, we're talking here about it all comes back to the future. And again, I think that needs to be paid off, and we'll do that in this next slide. When talking about what you put into the pot versus what you take out of the pot, which of these do you care about most? There's a lot of words here, but I think it's significant to see. We're not suggesting that because only 10% saw the idea of putting pounds being saved each month, that is certainly how people want to think about contributing. But when we're talking about taking money out down the road, the clear winner is talk about the pounds I'll receive from my pension, and this is significant, as income. So let's go to another slider and show you some reaction that folks have in responding to this question. What would you do if you were projected to have, first choice, an estimated 82,000 pound pot value at retirement? And here we see that 68% would take no action. There's really something going on here. So what is the better way to describe what is coming out of the pot later in life? And here you see the real encouraging positive spin on this, which is rather than talking about a pot value as a total sum, talking about it in terms of income. How much tea is coming out of the pot later in life? And so an estimated 12,150 pounds of yearly income is the way to address that. So there's our first three principles. You need to be positive, plausible, plain spoken. We'll wrap up in the very few minutes we have left by talking about personal. I think, Gary, you'd agree, by far the most important of the 4 Ps.
Yeah, it certainly is, Scott. And basically what we're trying to communicate here is please make the communications about me. Make it feel like you're talking to me and not the masses. So to get us started here, there's a few simple things that we can really do here. We want to show you another video. Again, video starts at 50. Let's see if you can pick up, what we did in this video to get the response that we got. Let's play the video here.
No two retirements are the same. That's why it's important to revisit how much you're saving through your pension, so you can create a personalized plan that fits with your vision of retirement. You may decide that what matters most to you is collecting more savings in your pension each pay period. Or, if you're already putting in more than the minimum and feel on track, you may decide to take more income in your pay packet instead. Whether you top up your savings or scale back to get more money today, you know the contribution level that's best for you. No matter what you decide, customizing your savings rate will help turn the default pension scheme into your personal pension scheme.
So let's actually look at the text here and see what we came up with. You can see where this ends up at a very, very positive dial. And there's really 3 things that we did here. The first thing we did is we personalized it. We made it all about them. This is your vision of retirement. The second thing we talked about in that middle paragraph is the whole idea of choice. You may decide to take out more income in your paycheck. Again, this is another positive theme that works very well, is making sure that the participants feel like they have some choice and control in the matter. And then finally, you can see in that last paragraph, it was punctuated with you and your, you and your. The big swing thought on this whole idea of making it personal, think about ways in which you can use that personal pronoun, you, your, you, and your. It is so powerful. We've seen this dial after dial. So number 1, when it comes to being personal, think about that you and your principle. Here's another one. Which interests you more? Let's look what does win. We want to help you fund a better retirement versus we want to help scheme members fund a better retirement. And that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Let's use that word you instead of a general phrase such as scheme members. Let's look at another data point here that kind of gives us some support. We asked the question, which is the better reason to rethink how much you're contributing? You can see what wins. 78% to create a personalized savings plan that fits with your vision of retirement. 2 powerful ideas there. The personalization of the savings plan, as well as that your vision of retirement. What doesn't is talking about the whole idea to create a savings plan that stays in line with how your peers, there's that word peers, your age, are saving. Doesn't test well at all. Whenever we talk about peer-based, people are thinking about fear-based. I don't care what my peers are doing. I really care about what's going on in my world. Let's make it personal. Let's do everything we can. As a big swing thought here is to make this about the individual participant. When they feel it's made personal, they will engage more. All right. So there we go. Kind of the last piece here is kind of a summary. Scott, I'm going to flip it back to you to kind of summarize the 4 key principles. And again, as we said, these are the 4 filters to think about your communications as you think about what you write, what you put on your website that can make engagement more of a probability. Scott?
Scott, I think you're on mute at the moment. If you could come off mute for us.
Is Scott on? Did we lose Scott?
Yeah, Gary, I think we've lost Scott. I don't know whether or not perhaps maybe you can just take us through to the end.
Sure. Why don't I do that? Yeah, let's just do that. So let's review those 4 principles again as we conclude here. First of all, let's make sure that our messaging is positive and hopeful. That's what they're looking for, not fear-based or, putting that burden of obligation on them. Making sure that our benefits are plausible, that they're believable to the people that we're talking to. And then finally, making sure that we are plain spoken, that we're using language that they understand, and let's make it personal. Let's really make it all about them. And when that happens, people are going to start beginning to feel like they can engage and want to engage. So if you like what you saw here today, 3 things that we can provide here. First of all, Nest has done an excellent job on providing some white paper information. It's absolutely fabulous. The second thing we want to provide for everybody is what we call the top 10 toxic phrases. All right, and you'll really enjoy those, what not to do. And then finally, we would also offer for those who are interested a word lab. And this is where we basically come in and look at your material with you, what we're doing well, and maybe what are some of the things we could improve upon, based on the research that you've just seen there. It's been a very, very effective tool in really enhancing our communication to scheme members. So, Steve, back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gary. I think, an incredibly interesting presentation, and I think the beauty of this is it's a complex topic, but ultimately the simplicity of those principles is something that can be pointed at almost any question. So I think really, really interesting. Perhaps maybe we can just turn to our panel. And Gary, if you can turn your video off, and Scott as well, if that would be okay. And Sally, I might just turn to you first, actually. I mean, you will have had a lot of experience of this. I mean, I know you've had some time to have a run through of the copy of the research, but just really interested in your summary views, really.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I suppose my views come from a context of having thought about the challenge of communicating defined contribution, savings and investments for a shocking 20 years now. And you were kind enough to mention that I'm an actuary, and Scott was started off with a joke. So the danger is that actuaries are always right, or can prove they are. And numbers, of course, are always right, and that's the best way to explain things. So my original foray into trying to communicate DC was very much about looking at what models can we produce to estimate, to show the uncertainty, to show the range of outcomes. And that's not what it's all about. And we knew back then that it wasn't what it was all about. Behavioral finance was just coming in and telling us to focus, make sure that we were careful about the risk aversion, and encouraging people to look at the downside as well as the upside, which is where maybe some of that fear crept in that Gary was talking about earlier. And then behavioral finance really came into its own with the birth of auto-enrollment and Nest. And the default, the don't tell people what to do or try to communicate with them or try to educate them, that isn't the mission here. The mission is to just get them to do something through some libertarian paternalism, just push them in the right direction, nudge them, as the words become. Unfortunately, pensions freedoms changed that, and certainly when I was a trustee at Nest until last year, pensions freedoms came in and meant that suddenly people would have a very difficult decision to make when they reach the tender age of 55 or beyond in terms of actually what do they do. So not engaging with your pension is not an option. The decisions that you need to make are too difficult. And what I find really fascinating about this bit of research is it really focuses on that segment of the workforce who were the great unpensioned or not very much pensioned before. They're not the people who would go along to their independent financial advisor and ask for the latest whizzy investment tools and how they could get the best tax savings. These are people who've got into some good habits and need encouragement. And one thing that I've become in the last 20 years is a parent. And one thing that you learn from that, and I'll come on to another one in a minute, is that praise is magic. not naggy telling off. If you encourage people, then that really does make a difference. If you encourage your kids and praise them for doing their teeth rather than nagging them about not doing their teeth, it really does matter. So I couldn't agree more with the importance of being positive. On the plausible, this generation, these people who are saving and are probably not really sure how much they should be saving or whether they should be saving, that security, particularly in the current COVID environment, is really important. Plain spoken, yes, if we can. We do find it difficult as a pensions and investment industry, but you just need to ask somebody outside our industry to help, and they can do that. Mostly by focusing on the benefits, again, that positive side of things, not the features. This has got an X tracking error and da-da-da-da. I love riding a bike. I don't need to know how it works. The benefits of doing all that. What I found most fascinating about this research is what the personal bit. It's not about people like you and peer pressure, which might work well for those with a large quantity of testosterone. I have a 16-year-old son now. But it doesn't work for everybody. I found it absolutely fascinating that women preferred pay in and men prefer to invest. So just thinking about those nuances and maybe using technology and different paths for communication to really make sure those messages hit home. Because ultimately, it's not how much investment risk people take, it's how much they pay in. And if there are ways that we can encourage them to make more of the tax breaks, of the employer match, of the time that their money will accumulate, that would be absolutely brilliant. And this is a very useful way of thinking about things going forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sally. Some really interesting points, which I'm definitely going to come back to you on in a minute in the Q&A. I'll just invite Matthew, actually. Matthew, would you just like to perhaps maybe give some of your thoughts? And also, I guess you were very close to this, what it meant to you and Nest when you went through this, and any kind of sort of surprises or observations yourself.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, that'd be great. And before I start, I just want to thank the whole Invesco teams and indeed the Invesco consulting team for an excellent presentation of the findings there. I thought they really landed the points really well. And I also just want to generally thank Invesco for their fantastic support, both as Nest Insight's strategic partner and also for supporting this work, which for us, for Nest Insight, this fits really centrally into our research agenda. It fits within a strand that we tend to think about as encouraging smarter savings, and particularly trying to get Generation Default focused on doing the things that are going to give them the best outcomes. Some of you may have seen a recent report we put out that's part of the same strand of work, which was around the role of environmental, social and governance factors in potentially encouraging members to engage with their pensions. And that's all just for us, a wider program of work to think about how to ensure that the auto-enrolled population, people who, as we all know, are largely on low to middle incomes, may not be supported by advisors, are going to get better outcomes in retirement. And in doing that, we do have to recognise that defaults, as Sally alluded to, defaults are going to be fine, potentially for many lower earners, particularly, who might be coming into automatic enrolment quite young, saving persistently through their careers, although then they will, as Sally says, have decisions to make at retirement. But many others just they haven't joined auto-enrolment early enough, they may not be contributing at a high enough rate for themselves. So many people are going to have to take matters into their own hands, and that's where you get this challenge, this conflict between the power of defaults to get people saving, but then the need for individual engagement to get people doing things for themselves. And I guess that leads to the one main point I think I'd just add to the excellent presentation that the consulting team did. And actually it also picks up on something that Sally said. And this is to bust a common myth that we have in the industry since automatic enrolment came in. We have this idea that you're either using nudges, you're auto-enrolling people and saying nothing to anyone, or you're engaging people and trying to educate and turn them into smart investors and smart savers in their own right. And actually, to us, those are two false poles. It's a false opposition, really. I think sometimes you could look at results of a study like this and come away with the idea that, well, on the one hand, nudges will get people saving in pensions, but there's some other ingredient you need, some other thing that we call engagement that can encourage people to take action. And that sort of assumes that nudges and engagement are two different things. But actually, auto-enrollment's by far not the only nudge. And as nudges go, it's quite a blunt instrument. It's very effective, but it gets everyone doing the same thing. And in fact, the research that you've just seen for us started with the question, how can we better use language in the context of behavioural interventions? How can we make the behavioural interventions work better with better language? Because behavioural economics isn't just about the sort of hard incentives like auto-enrollment. It's broader. It's about moving from a mindset where we think we have to incentivize and persuade and cajole people into doing things, and flipping that around and saying, people want to do the right thing. How can we remove the barriers that make it difficult for them to act in their own interests? And that's exactly what this research is focused on. So as you've heard repeatedly through the slides, it's not about how can we persuade better by telling people they should save more, or even sometimes sort of threatening better by telling people that bad things will happen if they don't take action. What we tried to do instead was think, how can we identify the barriers that stand in people's way? And there are many. And a lot of them are just to do with basic misunderstanding. A lot of them are to do with not even knowing that you can change the defaults, and that the default isn't the recommended amount, it's just a starting point. And also how we can then use language to overcome these barriers. And I hope, particularly if you have a look at the white paper that's available for you to download, I hope you'll see that the research gives you a lot of material, including all the great ideas you've seen in the presentation about how you can do that. I also just want to stress that, as Scott said right at the top, we don't, any of us, believe that language on its own is some kind of magic bullet that can completely change people's behaviour. But we think it's an incredibly powerful part of the picture. And when used in combination with well-designed behavioural triggers, we think it can make a real difference to the ways in which people engage with their savings. And that's a sort of trail, really, I guess, for how now we in Invesco see our partnership going forward. Because the next step in this research for us is to take some of the findings and the learnings that we've generated through this piece of work and start to design some actual real-world trials where we can get out and test different interventions that use these kind of language techniques and really see what we can achieve in terms of changing actual behaviour in the real world. And so we very much look forward, I guess, to coming back sometime in 2021 and talking to you about those things. But for now, I'll hand back to Steve.
That's brilliant, Matthew. Thank you. I have a feeling that there's plenty of questions that spin out of a lot of these thoughts. Look, we had a question come in through the chatter box just now, and it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's COVID. It's the environment that we're in. Perhaps maybe Sally, can you just give some observations from your perspective as what you think that means to members? And then I suppose also, Matthew, and I guess this also opens up to Invesco Consulting, observations around the current environment, doing research like this and modifying language, bearing that in mind. So sorry, there's a lot of questions there, but Sally, just your observations around what this means to members, COVID.
I think the most important thing is that we are seeing across the financial services industry an uptick in people taking out life insurance and thinking about their financial security. It has brought home to people what vulnerability means, not just in a COVID sense, which really resonates with the realistic side of the messages, making sure people are financially secure and being reassuring about that. We're not trying to make promises or guarantees. It's just that reassurance that the praise that people are doing the right thing for their future and for their security in the longer term if they save and they save for their pension. It's a prudent thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. And Matthew, just from your perspective, I mean, we went through this research in the teeth of this. What were the observations and things that we maybe learned from that?
Yeah, well, I would just, for a start, totally endorse what Sally just said. I think that comes loud and clear, both in the findings of this work and also some of the other research we've been doing with both workplace pension members and self-employed people, that on the one hand, this crisis obviously creates tremendous pressures for people, and there's a lot of people who are thinking very hard about every penny or every pound that's going out of their pay packet. And in some ways, that can make this quite a challenging time to have these conversations with people. But on the flip side of that, it really raises the relevance and importance of saving in people's minds, and in some ways actually opens up a new opportunity for a conversation where it's quite hard to pay attention to things in the far future, as Scott's hiring anecdote at the beginning kind of really illustrated. But now people are really starting to focus on that. So I think it's finding the right space within a conversation to help people think about how to deal with their immediate needs, but within that open up a conversation about what they can do in the longer term. The other thing to say is this is not just one crisis. I mean, the other thing we see loud and clear all the time is, and we saw it in these results, I mean, we had 65% of the people in the study said their income had stayed the same in the past 6 months. During the crisis, 23% saw it drop, 12% saw it increase. And that's really a really key thing, I think, about understanding what's going on during COVID. And it really speaks again to this point about personalization. We're seeing plenty of people at the moment in the workplace who are becoming what we call accidental savers because they just find there's more money at the end of the month. They haven't planned that, but it's just appeared. And that's because a lot of their costs have gone down and maybe their income hasn't. So again, I think we're only sort of working our way through what the crisis means at the moment, but I wouldn't necessarily think of it purely as a negative context and one in which we should stop engaging people about the longer term.
Yeah. No, great. Thank you, Matthew. And I guess I might just bring in the Invesco consulting team here. You know, just your observations around how do you have to modify language to people in this environment? And is there anything to learn from previous crises that we've gone through in the studies that you've done?
Yeah, this is Scott. We've done these studies. Obviously, we began testing language in 2007 through the top of the market in the U.S. and through the absolute bottom of 2008 and 9 and then back again. And what we've really found is that, first of all, we need to be sensitive that we're not placing an additional burden on people to think about something that is just a part of their overall financial picture. But one thing's been clear, these 4 Ps have been consistent through troubled times as well as good times. And I think that the principles themselves speak to the universality of those principles. But I think we need to be careful about the words that we use under those 4 principles, depending on the situation.
Hey, Steve, this is Gary here. Just one last comment on this. One of the things that we found here in dealing with investors, it's almost been, COVID has almost created what we call a simulated retirement setting. You know, people are at home all the time. You know, I remember we had one couple tell us, you know, as they were sitting out on the back porch, they're going, they're in their 40s. This must be what retirement is really about. So I think this is drawn, you know, some focus to individuals as they are thinking about retirement, as they think about retirement and then save for retirement. So it's kind of really put a focus on what that actually looks like, that end game looks like in terms of retirement.
Thanks, Gary. One of the questions just flicking through that's come in is around the effects of pension dashboards. Obviously, that's been a work in progress for a bit, and if we could unlock that, feels like a fantastic engagement tool. I mean, Sally, have you got any ads?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and Matthew may have more up-to-date information, because I know that when we were doing some research on dashboards at Nest a few years ago, there were quite mixed messages about what individual savers thought about dashboards. I think some parts of the finance industry think this will be a trigger for a move to consolidate, and that's where the interest is. Whereas actually certainly some of the Nest membership were more just reassured to know where everything was, and as long as they could see it on the dashboard, they weren't so bothered about actually where it was being saved, how it was being saved, and how it was being invested. Which does resonate very much with it's about how much you've paid in rather than how it's being invested, and it's about what your plans are for the future rather than actually what's going on with the money right now. So I think there are things, and Matthew's already mentioned the ESG, the responsible investments, the how is my money working, what good is it doing, those kinds of things. I suspect actually could be more powerful in terms of an engagement tool than just there being somewhere where somebody can keep an eye on their savings from day to day.
Yeah. Thank you, Sally. Matthew, I guess same question to you, really.
Just to pick up on what Sally said, I think something like a dashboard fits square and center in this set of ideas in this research, particularly in terms of the plain speaking idea and talking in terms of pounds and pence, talking about outcomes rather than accumulation and what you're building up at the time. So I think a dashboard could be an incredibly effective step in a journey in which you're using good messaging and nudges to try and get people to start considering what their outcomes look like, whether they fit the retirement they're looking for. But I think the risk would be just thinking that just putting a dashboard up is on its own going to create that behavior change. As I've said about language already, these things need to be put together in a way that brings the horse to water as well as encouraging it to drink. And so I think it's filling a massive gap, and it's maybe a baseline that we really need to get to have this sort of information available for people when they are engaged. But it doesn't necessarily overcome that initial hurdle of getting people to switch on and think about why they need to consider the amount that they're saving. And then, as Sally says, I think it could be both reassuring for some people and also stimulating action with others.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. One of the things that struck me, and when we've done, I was fortunate enough to sit behind the mirrored glass when we did one of these sessions in person some years ago with our team, is just around the level of financial education and the barriers to engagement around that. Matthew, just your thoughts on that. Is that really the key that's going to unlock this? And how aspirational is that?
I think it's hugely important that we focus on enabling all citizens to be better users of the financial system. Okay, and I think financial understanding, and actually, if you look at a lot of the work by the Money and Pension Service, it's down some very baseline capabilities like numeracy before you even start thinking about trying to help people understand how the markets work that we really need to get to. We find a lot of people in Nest don't even know their money's invested, and so there are foundational ideas that I think it's very important to get to people. And when we talk about financial education, we don't necessarily mean a degree course. But the other thing I'd say is it's really important to recognize that there's a wealth of evidence out there saying that financial education on its own doesn't drive behavior change. So it may be something we think it's really important to put out there into the community and to encourage a more informed population. But if what we're seeking is people taking maths into their own hands and starting to make more contributions into their pension pot, it will probably help if they've got the financial education, but again, we still need to think about what kind of interventions can encourage and engage around that kind of action. Again, it's not the full answer in its own right.
Yeah. No, understood, Matthew. I don't know, Sally, if you had any observations around that.
I have a lot. I think education and absence of education is used as an excuse by people who can't be bothered to communicate really well. So my maths teacher, interestingly enough, my inspirational maths teacher came from a school where maths was in the languages department. And she said, maths, what's really good about maths is it's a very pure, very unambiguous communication tool. If you can remember that and make your English as good as your maths, you'll go a long way. And I think absence of education is used rather as an excuse. That people are too stupid to understand something. The reality is people who are having to watch their budgets understand money in the way that those who might be more financially confident perhaps don't have to. We just need to translate it into language that will help people do the right thing, not understand, do what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess on that as well, Steve.
Yeah, go on, Matthew.
Sorry, just very quickly, because I think Sally's made such an important point, and there's a wealth of evidence now that says information overload, cognitive overload is one of the big reasons why people, particularly people in poverty, but also people on more limited means with more pressing demands on budgeting, find it difficult to make decisions. The more information we give people, actually, the more we could be overloading them and making it really difficult for them to make good decisions. So we shouldn't always think more information is better.
Yeah. And I think that sort of talks to the simplicity, I guess, of this study, and then pointing to sort of simple principles that make sense to people, that are plain spoken and personal to them. And I guess on that note, and I might just turn to my colleagues in the being live from the US. Gents, you've done this all over the world now. You've done it in Japan, you've done it in Australia, you've done it in the US. What are the, if we're going to leave people with, what are the toxic words that you may want to use or may want to lose, I guess? Any kind of sort of observations and how they vary also, I guess, regionally? Does language matter depending where you are in the world?
Well, first of all, in doing this research across the world, we found very, very minor differences, and they're typically around individual words. But the principles themselves, probably the most toxic messaging is around, as we talked before, tying it to some kind of peer-based competition. And we like to say the phrase is, peer-based is fear-based. And we've seen a material shift here, at least with our own plan provider at Invesco, where we used to get communication as how we were doing versus our peers. You're in the 17th percentile. You can't find something more demotivating than that. It also brings in the idea of sort of a big brother looking over your shoulder and comparing you. So I think the greatest toxic trap is this idea of putting people in a peer-based situation. Peer-based is fear-based.
Yeah. Gary, any observations around that? And maybe let's change that question slightly with, does it make a difference if it's a man or a woman, young or old?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that all the time. And one of the things that we've found, because we've actually tried to, in many of our studies, look for big macro differences between men and women. And we seem not to be able to find them when it comes to language, specific words. Now, I will say that we have seen some on the margins. I think Sally mentioned, you mentioned some, but in terms of big, principles, these principles that we just are talking about have, equal weight with men and women. Now, the way that we approach them in a personal, way, and how that we communicate with them, can actually be a little bit different. But when it comes to the language, we really haven't seen that much of a difference.
Yeah, I would say, Steve, one more thing on that. I think the other thing that's interesting is that it's a responsibility that we have on the manufacturing side is to make sure that our communication is more about investing than investments. And it isn't to suggest that in-depth seminars around education on investments is unimportant, but you only have so much bandwidth to communicate to scheme members, and it's really the concepts around investing are more important than the underlying investments.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. I guess, Sally, and I'm conscious of time, but just briefly, just in your experience, the need for the schemes that you've been with, the need to sort of pivot between different, perhaps maybe communication mediums, whether or not that's digital or mail, between your age groups. Have you got any sort of observations on tackling that?
Well, I think at about the time we were getting interested in behavioural finance, we also did a very important piece of work. This was as part of Aon Hewitt with working with Richard Thaler in the US, looking at segmenting the population. And there are some interesting patterns about when different age groups prefer to do their silver surfing and whether they do prefer to find the information with their peers in the office or not. So it's fascinating how the bringing on of a retirement environment might change and maybe even homogenize the way that people are communicated with now that we're all much more used to communicating virtually, webinars. Is there a great potential there in terms of bringing together a peer group without them being a peer group that becomes a competitive environment, a supportive group, rather than a destructive group?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm just conscious that we are coming up to the close now. I invite the group if they have any sort of final comments or anything that I've missed, a question that I was going to ask. A couple of comments and we close. Was there anything that the group wanted to add? No, I think we may. Gary,
yeah, I know. Just real quick, one of the questions we always get is this whole concept of fees. What about fees? And throughout all of our studies, the word fee has been a very, very negative word, as you can imagine. People think it's something they are tacking on. Our research shows that there's a better way to talk about fees, and that is to frame it with the word costs. And we need to understand that this whole issue of fees is never going to go away. We need to become better at, making sure that we frame this whole idea of fees and costs correctly. And the one thing we know that they dislike is anything that is unexplained, any fee that is unexplained, and most importantly, unexpected. I just wanted to put that in there as just a last little tidbit of research that we've done.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gary. We're racing up to the hour now, and in the interest of keeping time, I think I'm going to close this off. But I just want to say, look, thank you, to our panelists, to Sally and to Matthew, clearly to my colleagues over on the other side of the ocean at Invesco Consulting. Thank you to them for their presentation, and more importantly, all the people on this call. I just also like to make special mention in the similar vein that Matthew mentioned us at Invesco. What a fantastic job and a pleasure it has been to work with Nest Insights team. A lot of people behind this research, and on behalf of everybody at Invesco, we've really enjoyed the process, and we look forward to that continued partnership. On that note, if you want any more information, then just please make contact. You're welcome to make contact with me, and we can assist you in how you might take some of these principles forward with your own member communications. But with that, thank you again to everybody, and I will close the webinar there. Thanks all.
Thanks all.